The call came at 9:17 p.m., just as I was shutting my laptop and mentally crossing off the day as finished. The room was quiet in that end of evening way, fan humming, phone charging on the desk, half folded laundry on the chair. I almost ignored it. Almost, when I saw my sister's name light up the screen, I answered without thinking. "Hey," I said, "what's up?" There was a pause, too long to be casual. I could hear voices in the background, muffled laughter, clinking glasses. The sound of a house already deep into celebration mode. "I need a favor," she said finally. Those 4 words should have triggered something, a warning, a reflex, but family has a way of dulling instincts. When your sister asks, you don't prepare defenses, you prepare solutions. "What kind of favor?" I asked. Another pause, this one heavier. "So, one of my bridesmaids backed out." I straightened, backed out, "like tonight?" "No, no," she said quickly. "Not tonight, tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, as in the wedding she'd been planning for over a year. The wedding with spreadsheets, seating charts, and color-coded binders, that wedding." "Why?" I asked. "It doesn't matter," she replied, too fast. "It's handled. I just need you to step in." The word need landed with weight. Not want, not ask, need, step in how. I said carefully, as a bridesmaid. I laughed once, short and confused. "You're joking." "I'm not," she said. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Important, another word with teeth. I looked down at myself. Fold t-shirt, mismatched socks, hair tied up without thought. I pictured the wedding photos I'd seen teased on Instagram. Satin dresses, coordinated heels, hair and makeup booked months in advance. "I don't have a dress," I said, "or shoes, or anything." "That's fine," she replied. "We'll make it work." "We'll make it work" is what people say when they've already decided and just need you to catch up. I hesitated. "Why me? You're my sister," she said, as if that explained everything. "And I can't have uneven numbers. People will notice." There it was, not "I want you beside me," not "I can't imagine the day without you," but "people will notice." I swallowed. "I wish you'd told me sooner." I know," she said. "But there was drama, and I didn't want to stress you out." The irony almost made me smile. In the background, someone shouted her name, laughing. Music rose and fell. She was already in the middle of the night before her wedding, surrounded by people who belonged there. "I really need you," she repeated. "Just this once, for family duty, the unspoken contract, the thing you don't negotiate because saying no feels like betrayal, even when yes feels wrong." "I guess," I said. "If that's what you need." Her relief was immediate, almost palpable through the phone. "Thank you, seriously, you're saving me." Saving her from what? She didn't say. "Be here by 7 a.m., she added. "Hair and makeup start at 8. "And the dress?" I asked. "Oh," she said lightly, "we'll talk about that when you get here." The call ended before I could ask anything else. I sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, listening to the silence rush back in. The fan hummed. A car passed outside. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt slightly off, like a room where the furniture had been rearranged in the dark. I tried to reason with myself. It's just one day. She's your sister. Weddings are stressful. All the familiar excuses lined up neatly, eager to be used. Still, something bothered me, not the short notice. That could be forgiven, not even the inconvenience. It was the absence of choice, the way the decision had already been made before I was invited into it. I went to bed late, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation, the pauses, the phrasing. The way she'd said people will notice instead of I'll notice. Morning came too fast at 6:45 a.m. I stood outside her house holding a garment bag she'd told me to pick up from a friend on the way. I hadn't been allowed to open it. "It'll wrinkle," she'd said, another decision already made. The house was buzzing. Cars in the driveway, voices overlapping, someone shouting for coffee. I stepped inside and immediately felt like I was entering a play already in progress. "Oh, you're here," my sister said, glancing up from her phone. No hug, no pause, just acknowledgement. "Good, go upstairs, they're starting soon." "Where should I put my stuff?" I asked. "Anywhere," she replied, already turning away. Upstairs, the bridal suite was full. Bridesmaids lined the mirrors, identical robes, identical slippers. They looked at me, then at each other, curiosity flickering briefly before being masked by polite smiles. "You must be the replacement," one of them said cheerfully. Replacement. The word stung more than I expected. I smiled back. "I guess so." Someone took the garment bag from my hands. "Let's see what we're working with." The dress came out. It wasn't my size, not even close, too tight in places that don't forgive tightness, too long in others. The color matched, technically, but the fabric was different, cheaper, thinner, unmistakably an afterthought. This was the only one we could get last minute. Someone said, apologetic but brisk, "We'll pin it." As hands moved around me, pinning, tugging, adjusting, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a rough draft standing among final versions. No one asked if I was comfortable. No one asked if I wanted to do this. Downstairs, laughter rose again, a toast. Cheers. I realized then that this wasn't about helping my sister stand stronger. It was about filling a gap so the picture stayed symmetrical. About making sure no one noticed something had gone wrong. And I was grateful in that moment that I hadn't had time to question it the night before. Because if I had, if I'd been given space to think about motives, boundaries, or consequences, I might have said no. Instead, I stood there, pinned into place, rehearsing a smile that would last all day, learning too late what a last-minute favor can cost when it's wrapped in the language of family duty. And the ceremony hadn't even started yet. The ceremony space looked nothing like the photos my sister had shown me months ago. Back then, it had been an idea, strings of lights, soft colors, laughter frozen in imagination. Now it was real, solid, immovable, rows of chairs lined up with military precision, white fabric draped everywhere, too clean, too intentional. Every detail screamed preparation. Everyone here had rehearsed their place. Everyone except me. A coordinator with a clipboard spotted me the moment I stepped into the aisle area. Her eyes flicked down, then up, assessing, calculating. "You're late," she said, not unkindly, but not curious either. "I was told to come here," I replied, gesturing vaguely behind me. She nodded once. "Stand there, second from the left." No explanation, no introduction, just placement. I walked where she pointed, my heels clicking louder than they should have, or maybe that was just in my head. The other bridesmaids were already lined up, hands folded, shoulders relaxed in practiced calm. They didn't move to make space. I had to slide in, careful not to brush against anyone, careful not to disrupt the symmetry they'd clearly perfected hours ago. No one spoke to me. I stood there, staring straight ahead, trying to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. Was I holding flowers? Was I walking with someone? Was I meant to smile or keep my face neutral? I glanced down. No bouquet, no instructions, just a dress that didn't quite fit and a role I didn't understand. The music started. Panic bloomed quietly, the kind that doesn't shout but tightens. I watched the bridesmaids ahead of me take a step forward in perfect unison. I hesitated half a second too long, then moved, immediately aware that I was out of sync, too slow, then too fast. I adjusted, matching their pace, but the damage was done. I felt eyes, not glaring, not hostile, just aware. Awareness can be worse than judgment. Judgment ends, awareness lingers. As we walked, I tried to remember anything my sister had told me. Left or right, pause or continue, smile or solemn, nothing. There had been no briefing, no quiet moment where she'd leaned in and said, "Here's how it works." Everyone else had knowledge I didn't, and they wore it easily. We reached the front. The bridesmaids turned. I turned a fraction late again, correcting myself mid. Motion like someone copying steps they didn't know by watching reflections instead of learning the choreography. The officiant began speaking. Words floated past me, vague and ceremonial. I focused on keeping my posture straight, my expression pleasant. My face felt stiff, like I'd been holding the same pose too long for a photo that wouldn't end. I became intensely aware of my body, of how my shoulders sat, of where my hands were, of whether my smile looked fake or too real. I could feel sweat gathering at the small of my back, trapped beneath fabric that hadn't been chosen for me. I risked a glance to the side. The bridesmaid next to me didn't look back. Her gaze was fixed forward, serene, confident. She belonged here, they all did. Their dresses fit perfectly, their hair matched. Their movements were natural because they'd been prepared to move this way. I was a variable in a system that hated variables. Somewhere in the crowd, I spotted a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She looked at me, then leaned toward the person next to her, whispering. They both glanced again, not cruelly, not loudly, just enough. I felt myself shrink, though I didn't move an inch. The vows began. This, at least, I understood. Words about love, commitment, choosing each other every day. People smiled. Someone sniffed back tears. I wondered if my sister would look at me. She didn't. Her eyes were locked on her partner, glowing, emotional, entirely elsewhere. I wasn't part of her focus. I was part of the framing, a piece of the background that made the picture complete. That realization settled heavily. Power dynamics don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they're quiet, built into the structure of a moment. My sister had power here, not because she intended to wield it, but because the day revolved around her. The planner listened to her, the bridesmaids aligned with her, the rules, spoken and unspoken, flowed outward from her needs. And I had none. I couldn't step out of line. I couldn't ask questions. I couldn't say, I don't know what I'm doing, not now, not here, not in front of everyone who had already decided what my presence meant. The ring exchange came and went. Applause swelled. The coordinator nodded sharply, signaling movement. We turned again. This time I anticipated it. I turned with them, relief flickering briefly, until I realized I didn't know where to go next. They started down the aisle in pairs. Everyone had a partner, everyone except me. There was a beat, half a second, maybe less, where nothing happened. Then the coordinator gestured impatiently. Just go, she mouthed. Just go, alone. I walked down the aisle by myself, the silence between claps stretching longer than it should have. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the crowd and everything to do with context. People don't need explanations to notice when something is off. They feel it. By the time I reached the end, my face hurt from holding expression. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. Back in the holding area, the bridesmaids relaxed immediately, laughing, chatting, comparing moments. Someone mentioned an inside joke from the rehearsal dinner. Another teased about nearly tripping during the walk. No one included me. I stood off to the side, suddenly unsure if I was meant to be there at all. A helper handed out water bottles, passing one to everyone before me, then hesitating. "Oh, do you need one?" she asked. "Yes," I said too quickly. She handed it over with a polite smile and moved on. That was the pattern of the day. Polite, functional, surface-level acknowledgement without belonging. My sister breezed past, radiant, dress trailing, photographer in tow. She squeezed my arm briefly as she passed. "Thanks again," she said. "You really helped." Helped past tense, as if my role had already been completed, even though the day was far from over. I watched her walk away, surrounded, supported, celebrated. I realized then that being placed in a public, highly visible position without context isn't just uncomfortable. It's destabilizing. You're expected to perform without understanding the rules, to succeed without knowing the criteria, to belong without being invited. And once the power dynamics are set, once everyone else knows their place and you don't, the silence fills in the gaps with assumptions you can't correct. I took a long drink of water and stood there, waiting for the next instruction I wouldn't receive. Fully visible, completely unanchored, and learning, in real time, how invisible someone can feel in front of a room full of people. At first, I told myself I'd done the hard part. The ceremony was over. The walking, the standing, the silent guessing game of where to place my hands, all of it had passed without disaster. No one had laughed out loud. No one had stopped the proceedings to point at me. By wedding standards that counted as success, I was wrong. The reception hall was louder, brighter, less forgiving. Soft ceremony lighting gave way to chandeliers and camera flashes. People loosened up. Filters dropped. This was where unscripted moments happened, and where mistakes became stories. As soon as we entered, the photographer started herding people around like chess pieces. "Bridesmaids over here," he called, waving an arm. I hesitated, unsure if that included me. "Yes, you too," he added, eyes flicking toward me with brief confusion before settling into efficiency. "Line up with the rest." We formed a row, dresses aligned. Bouquets lifted, smiles switched on. "Okay," the photographer said, squinting through the lens. "Let's tighten this up." He stepped closer, frowning slightly. His gaze landed on me. "Can we fix her dress?" he asked, not to me, but to the coordinator. Fix, as if I were furniture out of place. The coordinator tugged at the fabric, adjusting pins that had already been pushed to their limit. The dress pulled tighter, riding up just enough to be noticeable. "There," she said. "That's the best we can do." The photographer tilted his head. Okay, we'll just. Angle her. They shifted me to the edge, then slightly behind, then half a step back so I wouldn't break the line. "Perfect," he said, satisfied. Perfect for the photo. As the camera clicked, I felt heat crawl up my neck, not from exposure but from awareness, the kind that comes when you realize people are solving a problem around you instead of with you. "Smile." Someone whispered sharply. I smiled. Between shots, one of the bridesmaids leaned toward another and murmured something I didn't catch. They both glanced at my dress, then away, lips twitching. It could have been nothing. It could have been about the weather, but the doubt stuck. We moved on to group photos, family combinations, friends, cousins. I was in some, not in others. No one explained why. Sometimes I'd step forward and be waved back. Other times I'd stay put and be pulled in at the last second. "Actually, you, come here," someone would say, then later, "Oh, sorry, you can step out for this one." Each correction felt small. Together, they added up to something heavier, a constant reminder that my presence was conditional. At the head table, place cards had been arranged with careful thought, names written in looping script, relationships mapped and balanced. Mine was handwritten, slightly crooked, tucked at the far end. I stared at it for a moment before sitting down. Across the table, an aunt smiled at me. "I didn't know you were a bridesmaid," she said, voice warm but curious. "Neither did I." I replied before I could stop myself. She laughed, assuming it was a joke. "Oh, last-minute thing," she said. "Very." I answered. She nodded knowingly. "Well, you're a good sport. A good sport." Another phrase that sounded like praise and felt like permission to overlook discomfort. Dinner was served. Speeches began. Glasses clinked. People relaxed into their chairs, ready to be entertained. The maid of honor stood first, confident, polished. She told stories from years of friendship, inside jokes, shared apartments, late-night calls. The room laughed at all the right places. Then another bridesmaid followed. Then another. Each speech reinforced what I already felt. These women had history, they had context, they belonged to a narrative that had been building long before today. Finally, someone nudged me. "You're speaking too, right?" A cousin whispered. I froze. "No." I said I wasn't asked to. She blinked. "But you're a bridesmaid." "I know." I said quietly. A beat passed, then she smiled, slightly awkward. Oh, the speeches continued without me. At some point, the DJ invited the bridal party to the dance floor. Music blasted, cheers rose, people clapped along, the bridesmaids rushed forward together, laughing, lifting their dresses just enough to move freely. I followed, a step behind, unsure where to stand. The choreography, simple, practiced, played out in front of me. Spins, claps, a playful dip at the end. I missed the cue. I clapped when they spun when they dipped. Not dramatically wrong, just enough someone laughed, not cruelly, not loudly, but enough that others joined in, thinking it was part of the fun. Freestyle, someone shouted, the word hit harder than intended. I forced a laugh, leaned into it, did something vague and self-deprecating with my hands. The crowd cheered, assuming I was in on the joke. I wasn't. The spotlight lingered just a second too long before shifting away. Long enough for embarrassment to bloom fully, unmistakably. When the song ended, the bridesmaids regrouped, breathless and glowing. One of them clapped me on the shoulder. "You're brave," she said, smiling. I could never do that. Do what? I wondered. Exist unprepared. I excused myself and went to the restroom, locking myself into a stall I didn't need. The noise outside muffled. The lights hummed. I stared at the floor, grounding myself. This was how it happened. Not all at once, not with cruelty sharp enough to protest. Just a series of moments where helping quietly turned into being noticed for the wrong reasons, where visibility became vulnerability. Where laughter, intended or not, left no room to explain yourself. By the time I returned, the night had moved on. People danced. Drinks flowed. My moment, such as it was, had passed, but the feeling didn't. I realized then that embarrassment doesn't always come from being wrong. Sometimes it comes from being unprepared in public, from being placed in a role without support and then judged for not performing it well. I had shown up to help, to fill a gap, to make things easier. Instead, I had become a brief spectacle, unintended, unprotected, and unforgettable in ways I hadn't chosen. And the worst part wasn't the laughter or the glances. It was knowing that if I said anything later, if I tried to explain how it felt, it would be dismissed with a smile and a phrase I was already learning to hate. It was just a joke. The wedding ended the way weddings always do. Sparklers in the dark, laughter floating into the night, people hugging. Goodbye with promises they wouldn't all keep. Cars pulled away, music faded, the house emptied. What didn't fade was the feeling. I rode home alone, heels kicked off, feet aching, phone face, down on the passenger seat. My reflection in the windshield looked older than it had that morning, like something had been quietly taken from me and replaced with clarity I hadn't asked for. At home, I peeled off the dress carefully, as if it might still matter. Pins fell to the floor one by one, small metallic clicks marking the end of a role I never auditioned for. When the fabric finally slid free, relief washed over me, but it didn't last. The dress had been the easiest thing to remove. I sat on the edge of the bed and replayed the day, not as a blur, but in sharp, unkind detail. The pauses, the glances, the way people had laughed with me without realizing they were laughing at me. The way my sister's gratitude had sounded complete before the cost was fully paid. I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding all day. Would she have done this to anyone else? The answer came too quickly. No, she wouldn't have done it to a friend. Friends get explanations. Friends get choices. Friends get asked, not assigned. Friends get protected from embarrassment, not placed in its path. But I was family. Family, I was learning, was where boundaries went to dissolve, where silence was expected to be generous. Where discomfort was reframed as sacrifice, my phone buzzed. A message from my sister. Thank you again. Everything turned out perfect. Couldn't have done it without you. Perfect. I stared at the word until it felt hollow. Perfect for whom? I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. What I wanted to say wasn't simple. It wasn't polite. It didn't fit neatly into the language of post-wedding gratitude. What I wanted to say was, you hurt me, but saying that would require disrupting the story everyone else was already telling, that the day had been beautiful, that everything had gone smoothly, that family had come together when it mattered. I knew how this would play out if I spoke up. She'd look surprised, maybe defensive. I didn't mean it that way. Someone else would chime in, you're too sensitive. Another would add, it was just one day, just one day. As if a single day can't rearrange how you see someone, as if humiliation needs duration to count, as if silence is free, I thought about loyalty, how easily it had been assumed of me, how unquestioned. Loyalty, I realized, is often mistaken for availability, for compliance, for the willingness to swallow discomfort without complaint. I had been loyal, and in return, I had been placed in a position where my discomfort was invisible because acknowledging it would inconvenience the narrative. That night, sleep came in pieces. I woke up replaying moments I wished I'd handled differently. I imagined conversations where I spoke clearly, firmly, without apology. I imagined my sister listening, really listening, and saying, I didn't realize. I'm sorry, but imagination is generous in ways reality often isn't. Days passed. Photos appeared online, carefully curated, perfectly cropped. In every picture, I stood at the edge angled, half a step back, smiling like I belonged there. Comments poured in. Beautiful bridal party. Love the dresses. Such a perfect day. No one knew, and no one would unless I told them. My sister called a week later, casual, light. Did you see the photos? She asked. They turned out amazing. Yeah, I said, I saw them. Pause, everything okay. There it was, the opening, small, unintentional, but real. I could say yes and keep the peace, or I could say no and risk being labeled difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. I thought about the cost of silence, not just what it had already taken, but what it would continue to take if I paid it again. How many more moments would be framed as favors? How many more boundaries would be crossed under the cover of family obligation? No, I said finally. My voice was steady. Everything wasn't okay. The line went quiet. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I told her what it felt like to be unprepared in public, to be visible without protection, to realize too late that my role was functional, not personal. When I finished, my hands were shaking. She exhaled slowly. I didn't think it was that bad. I know. I said, that's the problem. Another pause. Longer this time. I was under a lot of stress, she said. I needed things to go smoothly. I understand. I replied, but smooth for you meant rough for me. Silence stretched between us. Not hostile, but heavy. Honest, finally, she said, I'm sorry. I should have handled it differently. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a full undoing, but it was real. When the call ended, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I hadn't disappeared to keep things comfortable. Family ties, I realized, don't excuse public humiliation. They explain how it happens, but they don't justify it. Love without boundaries isn't loyalty. Silence isn't strength, and being the one who will understand should never mean being the one who absorbs the damage. I had shown up when asked. I had stayed quiet when it would have been easier to laugh it off, but the story didn't end there. It ended when I chose not to trade my dignity for harmony again, when I learned that helping doesn't require erasing yourself, and family doesn't get a free pass to hurt you just because they didn't mean to. That was the real conclusion, not the wedding, not the photos, but the moment I decided that next time I wouldn't just show up, I would show up with a voice,